we have a wonderful guest this evening. Now, I'm going to say something that's some people might ask the question, why on earth would we be having somebody who is an expert in extraterrestrials when we are a spiritual adventure group? Well, and this happened because during one of our meditations, I had the opportunity, and it was, I consider it a complete blessing now. As I was within the meditation, I opened up a door and I ended up meeting another intelligence that was clearly, by its appearance, though very beautiful, it was clearly not a human being. And I had a wonderful interaction. And I fully realized whether this is from another dimension or whether it is from another planet, there clearly is, whether we know it or not, the possibility, the probability even exists that when we're going down this amazing journey, spiritual journey that we're all on, we're going to open up these doors. And hence, we need to know about it. We need to know what the possibilities are. And we need to know beyond the fables that we have, and I'm not meaning that in a negative way, of our society that generally believes aliens from some advanced place come sailing in and then experiment on us. And I don't know that that's accurate at all, especially after reading many of the resources that are out there now of human interactions with them. In fact, it seems it's more like a spiritual endeavor. So with that, I am completely honored to introduce to you Barbara Lamb. Hi, Barbara. How are you today?
Well, thank you. And I must say that I'm really amazed at the promotion that you did for this talk tonight. A beautiful, beautiful promotion. So thank you. That was wonderful of you. And I agree with you about the whole spiritual component, that the extraterrestrial phenomenon really does involve that. In fact, some of the beings out there, and there are many, many different species of extraterrestrial beings. The cosmos is full of them. And that doesn't mean that every single planet has intelligent life on it, but an amazing amount of planets do have intelligent life on it. And we call that life extraterrestrial because it's not from our terrestrial planet. But a lot of the beings are physical, like we are, and yet they have amazing abilities. They have advanced so far beyond how we have advanced. And there are speculations that many of those species of extraterrestrials were many, many, many millennia ahead of human beings, even in our most rudimentary stages. So they have all this advanced technology, and they're able to travel the universe seemingly very easily. I don't know if it's easy from their point of view, but they do certainly come here in their crafts, and more of them are being reported. I think that for a long time, the UFOs have been seen by a person here and there, or maybe even a couple of people or a small group. But the reports usually didn't get very far. I know that early people, even in the early 1990s, when people would call into their local police station to say, I just saw a big object close overhead in the sky, and I want to know what it is, and is anybody else reporting this? And it was so unknown at that time, even in the early 1990s, that policemen just didn't know what to do with that. Fortunately, there started to become some UFO reporting centers. One of them is up in Washington State. And that man, Peter Davenport, who does this work totally as a volunteer because he's interested in the phenomenon, he has collected thousands. I don't know how many thousands, but definitely thousands of reports of these crafts that are unusual, that people think they couldn't be ours. We couldn't make them. So at least we've had that kind of attention going into the phenomenon in somewhat of a more public way. And then, of course, recently we've had the congressional hearings, and hopefully there will be more, and they'll be more in depth. But that's a really good start, I think, in acquainting the general public with the fact that we are being visited by many, many crafts. And those crafts no doubtedly have people in them or beings, not necessarily people. And so I think that bit by bit, more and more of this is coming out. Now, the connection with the spiritual aspect of things is extremely important, in my opinion. Many beings come and they do physical things with people, some of them, and they do a lot of checking up on people's bodies who are taken to the craft, in what many people refer to as abductions. I personally tend to think of them more as encounters because there's a great benefit for the person who is actually taken, that is true, and returned, and always returned very safely. They are not harmed in any way. In fact, in so many cases, with some of the very benevolent extraterrestrials, the people who are taken for these experiences are not only examined, but they are physically healed of whatever their malady is, healed right then and there while they're lying on kind of a cold, hard medical type table with unusual beings standing around and doing various procedures. And in my regression therapy practice with a few hundred people, a few thousand people, so many of them have had those experiences where at one time or another they have been taken by the beings and healed, usually by other beings other than the ones who actually escort them. And people have been healed of all kinds of things, including very serious things, life-threatening conditions like heart conditions and lung conditions, kidney, livers, pancreas, blood disorders, whatever. I mean, I've heard of so many different disorders that have been healed by these extraterrestrial beings. So some of them, as I said, are definitely seem to be physical beings who do physical things at a very advanced way with people. And if they don't actually heal the person, in many cases of the people I have worked with, the beings have told the person very directly, very specifically, when you go home, tell your physician that you have a problem with your liver or whatever organ they detected the problem in, and ask him to check into that and get some healing for you. So they either heal the person right then and there, or they definitely bring it to the person's attention and encourage them to get the healing through the medical system at home.
Yes.
And I know of just some really miraculous problems that were healed. For instance, one woman had a very rare blood disorder, and it was progressing. And she did not even know that she had a blood disorder, but she knew that she didn't feel the way she used to. She didn't feel right. And the doctors had not detected that it was actually a blood disorder. So the beings suspended her in the air, about 6 feet up from the floor, and nothing physical holding her, just suspended. And while she was in this state of suspension for at least 24 hours, they shined laser beams, each one of a different color and coming from a different direction, but right into her body. In other words, laser beams were coming down from the ceiling of that room and from the walls and from the floors. And for her, it just felt very comfortable and very nice. And they said to her while this was going on, you have not been aware of it, but you have a very rare blood disorder. And if it is not stopped at this point, it will continue to develop and it will end your life. So this was really important work that they did. And then it turned out a few years later, she had more detailed physical exams than she ever had before. And it was determined that, yes, indeed, she did have this particular rare blood disorder. And the doctors here, our doctors, were amazed that it had been progressing to a certain extent, and then it stopped progressing. And they said when they have seen this particular blood disorder in other patients, that it just kept on developing until the person actually died. So so they were aware. So then we did the regression after all of that. Excuse me. And the person was absolutely amazed. And it showed that the work that the beings had done really was very helpful. So she still has the blood disorder, but it is arrested. It will not progress anymore, and she'll be able to continue to live a normal lifetime. That's just one of many, many examples that I have about the healing that they do. So we've been talking right up until now about the physical aspect of these beings and these encounters. And there's also a spiritual aspect. And I think that that is extremely important. Many of the beings who come and visit people are not really physical. The person can see them, but they're really other dimensional. They're close enough to our dimension that we can see the form of the beings. And in some cases, the beings come from such enlightened realms, celestial realms, that there isn't the usual physical form that we see with them, but we see just a glow of light. It might be like an oval of light radiating out instead of the usual, what we would think of as a being standing there. So they come from these other dimensions sometimes, and they will take the person with them to have all kinds of experiences, reported usually as wonderful experiences, very enlightening. And often people mention or find out in their regressions and then mention it later that they had seen beings that may not be an oval shape, as I mentioned, but might be more of a humanoid form, and yet just radiant and glowing. And sometimes that glowing kind of goes in and out, sort of undulates, gets a little bit more compacted and a little bit more diffuse. In any event, these beings are described by people who experience them as beautiful. radiant, and above all, loving,
Yeah.
unconditional loving.
Yeah.
And we have heard, I'm sure that many of you have too, about people who've had the near death experiences and they've gone into the spiritual realm and they feel this wonderful, wonderful enlightenment and unconditional love, so much that they often really don't want to come back into this physical life, but they were told that there's more that they need to do here, and they do come back and they report these things. Well, some of the experiencers of extraterrestrial contact report the same sort of feeling of being unconditionally loved by these other dimensional extraterrestrial beings. So it's really lovely when people do have experiences like that. And the beings, particularly that type that I'm mentioning, they're very full of spirit and spiritual orientation and will encourage the person at least to meditate and to be more in touch with that whole spiritual realm and to get inspiration and guidance from that realm.
That's what's happening. They stole the FEMA money just like they.
Hello, let's make sure we mute everybody.
All right. That sounded like something quite dramatic. Anyway,
Yeah.
a lot of people in the general public, I think, have the idea that the extraterrestrials, whom they call alien, I don't like to call them alien, but that they're ones who just harass people and harm them, poke and probe, and very scientific and very uncaring. And I don't think that that is accurate from the few, probably at between 4,000 and 5,000 regressions that I have done on people. I have never encountered a situation where the beings were mean or harmful to the person or trying to harass or harm the person, no matter which beings we're talking about. Even the reptilian beings, which have a bad rap, but I do know from my own personal experience that there are some really good, very fine species within that reptilian over species. And they do a lot of things with people, but they can also be very helpful and very kind and very comfortable to be with, which really surprised me. I thought they'd all be very intimidating and scary to be with. And it's not true. There may be some that are more like that, but from my own experience of having been visited by one of those reptilians, that was a really wonderful guy. That was totally my impression. And I stood and held his hand, conscious awake in the light of day,
Yeah.
for about 5 or maybe 6 minutes while he talked to me. And he was just fine to be with. A really, like you would experience what you would consider a lovely person. This was a lovely being. He just happened to be reptilian. But anyway, many, many different kinds of beings. And then in the course of my work, I came across some what were to me at the time unusual aspects of this whole phenomenon. The first very unusual aspect was the phenomenon of certain beings being walk-in beings. In other words, either an extraterrestrial soul or maybe a soul in the spiritual realm decided that he or she wanted to come to Earth and really help humanity. And instead of going through the usual process that we go through, that a soul goes through, of being gestated in a womb and born and going through infancy, childhood, excuse me, teenage years, young adulthood, before they get to their real work. That's a long process, isn't it? So these people we call walk-ins are souls who decide to take a shortcut. In other words, not to go through that whole long process that the rest of us have gone through, but to find another soul who is living here in a body, a human, and that person does not really want to be here anymore. That person is not going to commit suicide, but really has decided, I've just had it. I just don't want to be here. I don't want this life anymore. So those two souls get together in a different realm and make an agreement that at a special time and place, the original soul of the person who has been living here until the person's usually 30s or 40s or 50s, that soul will leave at the very moment that the incoming soul from another realm will come in and inhabit the body. So the soul who is living is actually perfectly fine, having left the physical body, because that soul goes into the spirit realm that we all go into after we die. So the body doesn't die, and there is a new soul in it. And so that soul we call a walk-in, because it walked into the body. In a sense, it did that exchange. And I have known several people who are walk-in and have had the pleasure of regressing them. And in each case, they are wonderful, wonderful people. They come into a human body in our realm with so much more perspective and knowing and information, increased spirituality, and they really get busy adjusting to the life here once having walked in, and then going on for the rest of that life in their mission, which is always doing various things that are very helpful to other people and even to humanity at large. So walk-ins are described in great detail, much more than I can do, in the book, which I have written and Sheila Seppi has written. And Sheila Seppi is one of the walk-ins whom I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with. And she came from an Arcturian extraterrestrial realm with former heritage from other species of extraterrestrials as well. And she just is here with a tremendous amount of cosmic knowledge and is guided by what she calls her collective. These are other beings who are giving her guided messages and channeling through her, telling her the next project that she can do, which is very, very helpful to humanity. And so it's really, I think, a wonderful thing that souls can do this when they really want to bring a lot to us. So this book we just published, Cosmic Convergence, it has lots of details about the walk-ins, and there are various kinds of walk-ins. I mean, sometimes there might be two souls, for instance, that have come in and exchanged with the soul of a person being here. Sometimes the person who is originally here will keep the soul in the physical body, and another soul walks in, comes in, and lives so and guides that person. Usually the original person who has agreed to do this and wants to leave life is not particularly spiritually oriented. In some cases, definitely not spiritually oriented at all. And they think the whole spirit subject is just a bunch of rubbish, unfortunately. Um, but and that's why it's such a drastic change when the walk-in, who is always very spiritually oriented, comes in and the person is suddenly very, very different. So that's one of the subjects that we talk about in the book. The next subject we talk about is star seeds. And it could very, very well be that some of you listening to this right now could possibly be star seeds. So a star seed has not done a walk-in procedure. A star seed is born here from a human mother, right, born right into our world, but had heritage, previous lifetimes as various types of extraterrestrials. And they bring that knowledge, that guidance with them. So star seeds also are here on Earth to really help humanity. And some of them help in terms of being physical healers, some of them being spiritual counselors. There are all kinds of services that some of them perform. But basically, it's the same idea as with the walk-in, that they are here to help humanity in as many ways as they possibly can for their whole lifetime. And then the third category, which we've written about in Cosmic Convergence, is the category of hybrids, ET human hybrids. So this is a whole long subject in itself. I'll try to encapsulate it for you. Hybrids are made in one essential way, that at the beginning, that there is a woman who has eggs taken from her ovaries by the extraterrestrial beings, and sperm is taken from a man. It would be her husband if she happens to have a husband. And the sperm and the eggs are taken on board the craft and mixed together with extraterrestrial genetics and forming an embryo. And that embryo is placed inside the human mother. She is usually not conscious of it at all. And she might be aware of the beginning of some beings being in her room, but then she's not conscious for the rest of the procedure. So anyway, they implant this little hybridized embryo in the mother's womb, and she gestates it for at least 2 months. And if it is a hybrid embryo that is mostly, a larger proportion of extraterrestrial genetics, larger than human, then that little fetus, little embryo, will be removed from the mother. Again, she's not aware of this, and taken on board and gestated in a tank. Reports of having seen these tanks say that they look like kind of a glass tank full of special fluid. And from that tank, there are wires and tubes going to some sort of monitoring machine. So that little embryo is gestated into a fetus and into a ready-to-be-born baby, and then is taken out of that tank and cared for by the extraterrestrial beings. So that is one very typical scenario, and I know of many, many women for whom that has happened. Now, there's also a different kind of hybridization, which starts out the very same way, and yet is left in the mother's womb full term, and that baby is born here. So right from the beginning, that kind of hybrid is here, looking fully human, acting fully human, and yet there are some wonderful differences as well. So these babies who were born, even when they're toddlers and maybe 3 years old or so, they're aware that somehow they don't understand it, but somehow they're very different from all the people they know. And they're very different even from their own family members. And many of them feel like somehow their real, true family is not the one that they were born to, but somebody somehow out in space. So even as very young children, they will very often go outside, and especially at night, and look up at the stars and talk to their family out there and say, why aren't you here? You know, why don't you come and get me? I know I belong with you, not here. So anyway, they do grow up with their human family. And even from a very young age, they realize that they have certain abilities that nobody else in the family has, and none of the other children or adults whom they know have. In other words, a big range of psychic abilities, the whole range. And they see auras around people. And when they're with people, they feel the differing energies of different people. Many of them can sort of know intuitively what's going on wrong in another person's body. In other words, they have medical intuition as well. And they have clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, all of these things. And very often, even from a very young age, they've received guidance from somebody, and they may not know who that somebody is until they are adult. But anyway, they have a very interesting life, which is quite different from everybody else around them. And yet they look like a regular human child. And they are a regular human child, but they do have these extra genetics. And they too, these hybrids, are here totally for the purpose of helping humanity. The hybrids I know have each said independently, we are here to raise the consciousness of humanity. And that definitely includes raising the spiritual awareness and appreciation of humanity. Another big mission that they have is to help other people to be aware that there are these other beings out there on other planets. There are a lot of other beings flying around in their vehicles in space. And because so much of the world, I think now, still doesn't really accept that as reality, doesn't really believe that. I think that's changing a little bit. The more sightings of UFOs are reported, and the more that we have congressional hearings. And I think that there's some work being done in other countries by their governments to at least a little bit of extent to look into this and to be sharing it with their public. So I think that's good. I think it's good the more that we know about that. And there are a lot of misconceptions, I believe, about this whole phenomenon. I mean, there's, humanity, or at least a lot of it, really likes drama. And here we are almost at Halloween time, and we know that a lot of people are gearing up for doing scary things and dressing up as scary people. And that's just so typical of the human race. I don't know that there's any other race out there that has this particular feature, but humans seem to really like emotional drama. as we know from all of our media and even our songs. And so it's easy in the public media to portray these extraterrestrial beings as being frightening, and they're going to take over the world. And, even the hybrids are accused often of being here to take over the world, which is totally not the case at all. So I just think that it's wonderful that you've invited me to be here and speak about these things, to maybe learn a little bit more about all this than you have known. Maybe some of you know a lot about it, and hopefully this is not too repetitive, but I really appreciate your attention on this, and I would like to entertain questions if any of you would have questions about any of this enormous phenomenon.
Wow.
I do.
My head is actually spinning right now from this wealth of information that is just amazing to me. And we're going to get to questions. Relative to aliens, Michio Kaku, a world famous scientist,
Oh yeah.
said, we know something about aliens now. He goes, 2 things we've learned. Well, we're not alone. He said, that's a good thing. And he said, they've been around for an awful long time, so they're clearly no threat to us. So there we go. With that,
he's a good validation point too. I mean, he's such a brilliant man. I really appreciate him and his work.
Yeah, amazing. So we'll start with Tiffany, and I'm writing everybody down. Just raise a hand. I'll write your name down, and we'll get to everybody one at a time. So Tiffany, go ahead.
I think Ronnie was ahead of me, but
Okay, Ronnie.
No, go ahead, Tiffany. I'll follow you.
okay. So incredible information, Barbara. Thank you so much. That was wow.
All right.
I appreciate you sharing that. So I'm a full-time dowser, and I work a lot with clearing entities with people. And I also have done a lot of work with people having walk-ins, and I've also sometimes I've asked for the original soul to come back in. I've had some success with that, just a little bit.
Oh,
And that's been interesting if the person missed their original relative. That's been very interesting. It's very, very new. So I haven't done it that often. But what's really interesting is, I was taught through my training, it's usually a higher advanced soul, but I haven't always found that. Sometimes it's been a soul that comes in on the walk-in. I just wanted to say it kind of depends. It's not always the best fit for the family afterwards if somebody dies or you know what I mean? It's not a perfect system, shall I say. And then have 2 clients in particular that have had so-called very negative experiences with aliens. But the more you talk about it, I'm thinking, and I think I got wrapped up into this too, I think instead of the aliens, I think it probably was entities who were probably cloaking and disguising themselves and pretending to be aliens.
good point.
I've never seen that because they have struggled with, both of them have struggled with trauma, negativity in the past, and entities, right? And so it would make sense, just like the fear mongering in the United States with aliens, it would make sense that they could attach that to that. And I could have fallen right into that. So I really appreciate you've never ran across anything negative, and you've interviewed a lot of people.
I want to make it clear, I have not run across anything negative in terms of walk-ins. Yes, some people have had what they consider at the time, they consider very negative experiences with some of the beings. We have to remember again that there are so many different types of beings who visit human beings.
Mhm.
Some of them definitely seem to be more self-serving.
Okay.
Maybe studying the human physiological system for
Okay.
their benefit. They want to know what we're made up of, just like we would if we had one captured here, and we would want to probe it and examine it and see what his
Got
digestive
it.
system is like and all of that. So again, I don't think that that is intended to harm people, but I can see why people feel that way about it. And as far
Mhm.
as trauma is concerned, sometimes people get it mixed up in
Mhm.
the sense that they have had trauma, perhaps, or in their family,
Mhm.
been
Mhm.
traumatized and abused,
Yes.
and they don't want to face that. Good old Uncle Charlie or whomever, did that because they have loved Uncle Charlie. Can't
Mhm.
want to think of him that way, having done things. So they might think, especially if they're also having visits from extraterrestrials, they might think, oh, it was them.
Mhm.
Those who scared me, those who abused me, those who traumatized me. I mean, so that's why the regression can be so important, because the person gets to see who it is specifically, or who they are, and that can get kind of sorted out and clarified. But
I see what you're saying. That's really interesting.
and I had a man
Yeah.
call just last night saying that he had been brought up in a very sort of fundamental Christian religion, his family and his whole community. And he was also having visits from extraterrestrials. And when he mentioned that to his family or to the other people at church, they all immediately said, "Oh, that's it. You're visited by the devil. It's got to be the devil." And
Mm.
so he became very afraid of that, uh,
Mhm.
having been conditioned to be very frightened about the devil.
Mhm.
But gradually, he realized that no, these do not look like any pictures of the devil that I've ever seen. And he had plenty exposure to pictures of the devil because of his particular religious tradition. And he began to realize, no, these are really different. And no, these are not really bad. I mean, he was
Mm.
always sort of shocked when they would come and be there in his home and take him. But anyway, he's gradually realized over the years that, there must be something not only interesting, but something good, something decent. So we're going to do some regression. We've already set that up, but have not had the opportunity to do that yet. A lot
Can
of
the
things
soul?
can get
Oh, I
mixed up.
didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of things can get mixed up, can't they?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
a religious figure, like a devil and extraterrestrial. All all of these, which can be very frightening,
Mhm.
but so many people I have worked with started out by being frightened. Their curiosity outweighed the fright, so they wanted to do the regression. But they
Mhm. Mhm.
always said afterwards, I think everybody has said, um, "Oh, I'm so relieved." I mean, they are really different. They're really weird, but okay, I get it. It's okay. It's okay. Whereas I never felt before that it was okay.
Nice.
That's really cool. Do we have any say as human beings whether we get taken or not or experimented on? Do we have any? I'm sure you've heard this before.
Great
Can
question.
anyone ever say, no, I don't want this, or yes, sign me up?
Well, yes,
Is it
great questions. First of all, as I understand it, and I think this is correct, we are souls. We probably, your group is aware that we are basically fundamentally souls, and we're immortal souls. We go on and on and on. We reside in the spirit realm at certain times for maybe days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, possibly, depending on the choice of the soul. And every now and then we come into an incarnation. So, what I thought for many years, being involved in this, is that the soul, if it chose to go into a lifetime, it would go into a human lifetime. Now I realize, in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, more and more, that a soul can choose to go into an extraterrestrial lifetime if the soul wants to have that experience. And it is known by some people that many of us humans who are living here today have had previous lifetimes, maybe way in the past, who knows, but previous lifetimes as various forms of extraterrestrial beings. It's just that we've totally forgotten that. But we all just have that choice. But getting back to your particular question, in the spirit realm, when we are making the decision to come into a human life on planet Earth, we're deciding about various things that we're going to do that for, why we want to have a lifetime. And there are always certain themes or certain issues that a soul has been working on and maybe needs to continue to work on, or maybe take on some new themes, all for the evolution of the soul. And so there's kind of like a planning committee, a planning stage of the soul before, shall we say, taking that leap into physical incarnation and being conceived and gestated and born here on Earth. And in that planning stage, it's come up in quite a number of regressions, that in the planning stage, there appear some of these other beings, the souls of extraterrestrial beings, saying to the soul who's about to incarnate, saying, in that lifetime that you're going into, would you agree to cooperate with us here and there? And the person agrees, yes, oh, sure, I'll do that. Because the person is already deciding to work on maybe communication or being more loving or being more serving or getting over that narcissism or selfishness or learning how to recover from perpetrations upon them, or whatever the themes are. Or maybe just to have a nice, gentle life where everything's okay. That's okay to decide that too. So, but anyway, in that planning stage, the person, or the soul, I should say, has agreed, yes, I'll do that. You'll come once in a while. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll cooperate with you. Now, we forget that, of course, when we're
Yes.
living in life. We forget that, just like we forget all the other things that we had decided as a soul to come in to do and to experience. So that's why it seems so foreign to us, so out of the, but why, I mean, and many people come to me and say, why me? Why did they choose me? They didn't seem to choose my neighbors or my friends or anybody I know at school. Why did they choose me? And any time that I have regressed a person to that very question, why this is happening to them, it goes back to the soul before incarnating and making that decision, agreeing with those beings. Okay, so that's the beginning of it. Now I want to get on to the rest of your question, which is, can we stop it? Well, some people I know have had good results in just simply demanding that these visits stop. And they could sometimes demand it when the next visit happens. And they manage somehow, because they want this so much for it to end, that they have the presence of mind when the beings are first there to say, even if they just say it in their mind, because they may not be able to talk when the beings are there, even if they just vehemently in their mind say, no, I'm through with this, I break the contract, or even just no more, I've had it. And that people I know have had results doing that.
Yeah.
In other words, since doing that, they haven't had any other visitations by the beings. And some of these were doing this even back in the 1990s and still haven't had any recurring visits. So I think it's effective. But I was told by one extraterrestrial that you have to really, really mean it. You have to mean it with your whole heart, mind, body, that you don't want this contact with them, these visits anymore. It can't be just go away, I'm tired of this. You have to really say, no, I am through. Whatever our agreement might have been, I am breaking it now.
Mm.
And really mean it. And that has been effective for the people I know who have been able to do that. There's also the whole thing about people stopping a visit when it's just starting. And very often these visits start when the person is already in bed at night, but they can really happen anytime, any day, any place, driving in the car, walking in the woods, whenever, playing on the playground if you're a child. But anyway, very frequently they do happen when the beings are there. The person is there in bed, sleeping, and wakes up to be aware that there are others in the room, or they wake up and realize there's a little bit of light, actually kind of a big beam of light coming through the window into the room, or there's light filling up the room and they don't know where that light could have come from. It's not like the overhead light or the lamp light. It's, sort of a blazing white sort of light very often, or maybe blue in some cases. But anyway, so they can be taken by these beings in any situation whatsoever. And if they don't want the experience, and here they are lying in bed, and very often they immediately feel paralyzed. They can't move and they can't say anything out loud. They can't call out. If they have a sleeping partner in the same bed, they can't reach over and, touch the person or elbow that person to get the person's attention, because that person typically is made to be very, very deeply asleep, not harmed, but just totally out of conscious awareness. So the person, if they can't call out, can't talk, can't move, there are a couple of things they can still do to try to prevent the experience from continuing. And one of them is if they can move even the tiniest part of their body, like maybe their pinky finger, or maybe flare a nostril, or move a toe, that movement seems to break that spell of the paralysis and can break the encounter so that the beings will leave. Sometimes people open their eyes and they see the light, where they see the beings there. That itself doesn't seem to break the contact and have them go away, but just flaring one little tiny part of the body, maybe moving the chin a tiny bit if you can. That is enough to sort of break the spell. And then other people have found it successful, if these visits are happening, to immediately surround themselves with pure white light from the highest source, blazing white light of protection. And the beings seem to know that and go away. So even though that it is a matter of imagining the white light around you, that still has its effect in physical reality, in the sense that the beings will vanish.
Wow.
The method is to, in your mind or out loud if you can, but usually people are not able to out loud, but even in your mind, to just call upon Jesus or God or Allah or whomever your greatest spiritual figure is, Archangel Michael, some use, to just protect you. And so, again, even if it's just in your mind and no sound comes out of your mouth at all, but if you're really thinking that, really calling for help, that help does seem to call, and the beings leave. So those are some of the common methods that people I know have used, and they are effective. However, if those beings are determined to have an experience with this particular person, even if they go away on one of those occasions, they probably will come back some other time to do whatever they would. So a person who really doesn't want these has to be alert. As soon as they have the sense that these other beings are there, or even that they're coming, somehow people feel that they know. I can feel it. I know it's going to happen. There's sort of a different change in the energy around them, and they feel that kind of a heightening situation. And so if they will use some of these methods, then the beings probably don't even come to all the way to where the person is. So it's good to know. I'm glad you asked those questions.
Yeah.
I think it's good to bring those things out.
Yeah, excellent. Ronnie.
Barbara, this was an amazing talk. It was just wonderful. I was so excited to listen to everything. As a young child, I felt a lot of the things that we weren't alone in this world. And as we get on in life, we find these things out. One of the things you might have talked about when you were talking to Tiffany was that how are the human subjects selected for study and healing, and how are the women selected that are impregnated with the hybrids?
Well, for the women who are impregnated, they are people who have been experiencing these beings anyway, probably all of their life here and there. And so they would be a normal subject for doing that. And it certainly is thought that some of the beings chosen this among the experiencer people. Some of them may have characteristics in their genetics that these beings would like to combine with theirs. So you see, the hybrids are created, apparently, certainly seems, for a variety of purposes. And one of the purposes is to live here, as I have said, and some of the purposes are to live there on the ship with them and help the other beings in doing whatever their work, their missions are. And some of the hybrids have said in regressions I've done that they want to create human beings, or no, I'm sorry, they want to create hybrid beings who are composed of good human genetics and good extraterrestrial genetics, so that those hybrids can be go-betweens between Earth, between knowing and talking to people, and going to that other planet of those other beings and talking to those beings. I think that's a nice idea, being kind of an ambassador or a go-between. But anyway, I do really think that of all the people who are having these encounters with the beings, that when it comes to hybridization, they probably are choosing among that pool of people, people who have abilities, aspects of the genetics, qualities that they would like to see mixed with theirs. Some of the beings have said that one of the reasons that they create hybrids is to create a sturdier physical stock. We have sturdier physical bodies than many of those beings do, particularly those who are rather other dimensional. They're much more what we would consider ethereal. And then you see, there are several species that I have heard from in these regressions that have said that their species is on the verge of dying out, becoming extinct. And sometimes they give reasons for that. Like with some species, they've done so much cloning to reproduce people that they've lost the natural physiological ability to reproduce. And another group of ETs said, we have just been doing space travel for so many thousands of years. We picked up radiation, and it comes through the spaceship to some extent and into our bodies, and we just cannot reproduce anymore. So that's a big thing for them, big reason why some of the species are doing these hybridization projects, because they need genetics from another species. And one of the reasons why they choose the human species, by the way, there is hybridization going on from one ET species to another as well.
Right.
The reasons why they choose humans is that we have such a well-rounded ability for creativity, and we have emotion. Now, a lot of the species have, over the millennia, have bred out the quality of emotion. And they see us as humans having lots of emotion and lots of emotion. And they also, I know one extraterrestrial said, we recognize that your human emotions are a blessing and a curse. I agree. I definitely agree. So they may even be trying to select certain genetics from us to combine with them for the sake of their species to improve and develop. And I think that could very well be the case, that they're very choosy. They are incredibly knowledgeable. I am floored again and again with what they know, even what they know about me. And I'm not even a regular experiencer of extraterrestrial contact. I didn't start having these things happen when I was a child, like I think most experiencers do. But still, I don't know whether it's like remote viewing that we humans can do, or just general telepathy, or what their method is. But again and again, because of the feedback they give through my clients or even directly to me, is just incredible what they know about us. For instance, in doing the crop circle research that I did every summer in England for 25 years, one one summer when I was in a crop circle with three other women friends, and I discovered a whole new feature of the way that the wheat not only had been laid down, but had been swirled around into little nests right there on the ground. And we had never seen that before in a crop circle. I'd already seen hundreds of crop circles personally by then. So I was really excited, and I was calling over my friends to come. They were scattered around the crop circle. Come and look at this. This is really unusual. And we all knelt down and were looking at these sort of woven wheat features that had been laid down and swirled into little shapes. And my friends had never seen that in a crop circle before. And so anyway, it was a very exciting experience. Now, when I came home again, one of my very frequent clients who did many, many ET regressions with me, she also channeled an extraterrestrial being. And I kind of had many, many conversations with him through the channeling work over the years. And he said, "Oh, Barbara, I noticed how excited you and your friends were about that special feature in that crop circle." And he described exactly the four of us kneeling down, and there was kind of a swirled circle, and in that were these little sort of swirled nests. And he was describing it in great detail. And I said, "Were you there? It sounds like you must have been right there." And he said, "No, I've never been on Earth," although we knew an awful lot about Earth. He said, "No, I've never been on Earth. I just was there remotely." And so I don't know what that means, remote viewing. I imagine whatever method he uses, it must be quite like our method of remote viewing. So that's true of many of them, I think, who are guides and give messages for human beings here, and maybe not come here at all, but they know an awful lot about us, and they give a lot of advice and counsel to people here. I think it's very fortunate. I kind of admire and rather envy people who are getting regular messages from these wonderful beings. How about
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
Jonathan.
Good evening. Hi, Barbara. I'd like to again thank you, just as Rick did, for a terrific lecture. My question is this. Well, first of all, I'd like to say your understanding of extraterrestrials as being benevolent beings is certainly consistent with what I had learned from a very fine full trance medium many, many years ago, who communicated regularly with what he called space brothers. And then if you talk to people like Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer, I assume you're familiar with his work. He also concurs.
I'm familiar with
Come
him.
on.
I know him personally too.
Oh, good. Well, then if you know him personally,
Yeah.
you understand his perception, which he says that really, as he says, if they were malevolent, it would be a case of game over, long ago.
Right.
But he has a different explanation for why some people have horrendous experiences and, report feeling violated and invaded and all that. And he attributes that to our experiences with extraterrestrial technology and the alien reproduction vehicles. Would you concur that that is what's happened, where you actually have, I'll just say from the military-industrial complex, people abducting, people using alien and imitating?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes, there is a whole group of people and situations called my labs, meaning like military. That's sort of shortcut for military laboratory. So yes, there are definitely people who experience genuine extraterrestrial encounters and being taken away for various purposes and brought back. And they also, some of these same people, also have the occasions when it seems to them that there are military type people who somehow get into their homes and make them not able to move or call out. Somehow they must spray a drug or something, and they take the person from the home, put the person in usually a van with darkened windows, and drive for quite a while in some cases, and then down a ramp. It feels like that. The people can't really see where they're being taken to, but they can feel it, from the way the car feels. And it seems to be they are driven down into some kind of underground facility. And then when they're taken out of the van and they can see all around them, they see usually a pretty stark environment and often a medical table and examining equipment. And they see humans very often in military uniforms of one type or another. And they usually will see at least one extraterrestrial being who's there working with the human military. So those people do various physical exams to check on the person, see what's going on. And very often they will ask the person many, many questions about what have you learned from the extraterrestrial beings whom you were taken by. And I know one woman I worked with a while back, she had been taught how to levitate things with her mind. And they started teaching her this even when she was a very small child. And so we did regressions to some of her childhood experiences. And they would teach her to levitate something with her mind that she didn't physically touch at all. They'd start with something really, really light, like the smallest feather from a bird. And then maybe advance when she could do that. They would test her with trying to move a paper clip or a small piece of paper or a bigger paper or gradually a pad of paper, gradually a book, gradually a soccer ball. And so she was getting quite good at moving objects, including wooden blocks, which each had a special symbol, on each side. Anyway, these military people in the My Labs situation, they were testing her with various objects too, to see if she could really do that, moving things with her mind. And then they gave her a gun, a pistol, and she just rebelled. She said, no, I know what you're doing. You're getting me primed and ready to use weapons here and move weapons, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to participate in that. Anyway, many different kinds of things happen in these military abduction experiences. I think they truly are real. And I know one woman who is in England, a really lovely, lovely woman, and she has quite a bit of reptilian genetics in her, although you would never think that. She's very smooth skinned, very beautiful, actually. And but she has enough reptilian genetics as well as genetics from some other species as well. And she had the ability, she discovered when she was about age 20, she had the ability to somehow morph, change into her full reptilian form. In fact, that's how she found out that she was a hybrid. She'd always wondered about herself.
Wow.
But one day when she morphed into her total reptilian form, and she was so amazed, she was actually pleased because having some of the reptilian genetics in her, they were not obnoxious to her. I mean, they were something that was just part of her, and she accepted that. So it was on that occasion that some of the other beings who had given her their genetics, they
Yeah.
came to her and they said, this is why you are in this reptilian form right now. You will return very soon to your human form. But this is to let you know for sure that you do have reptilian genetics and other types of genetics in you, and you are a hybrid. So,
Mhm.
what a way to find out, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Surprise.
I know two other people, no, three other people who have had the experience of changing into their total reptilian form, the whole body, the whole form, uh, face, head, body, change into that reptilian form. Not for a long time. They don't go on for days and weeks like this, but maybe for a few hours.
Mhm.
So, in one case, with two wonderful women I know, um, they both had reptilian genetics in them and other species genetics as well. And they were at a conference together, and one of them uh, went in back to the room and got into bed earlier than the other one who stayed and socialized with other people for a while. And when she came back into the room, she looked over at her roommate and noticed that she was in bed in her absolute perfect reptilian form. And yet she still had the look of the person who she was.
Yeah.
That somehow showed through this big reptilian head and reptilian face. And then the one who discovered her, who came back into the room later, uh, she went to bed, had a perfectly good night's sleep, very comfortable with the other one being reptilian because she had reptilian genetics herself. And that one, the second one who came back in the room and discovered it, I was chatting with her at a speaker's party at the end of a conference that we both had been speaking at, a UFO conference. And there were about four of us standing there just chatting. And suddenly I noticed that her eyes or her pupils were changing from irises and round pupils
Yeah.
to oblong, a vertical slit. I could just see it happening, right in progress. And I said to her, do you by any chance feel anything different with your eyes right now? And she said, yes, I'm feeling quite a bit of pressure suddenly. And she said, oh. And then she ran into the ladies' room and turned on the light and had a good look in the mirror so she could see this. And she thanked me so much because she said there have been other times when people have pointed that out, but she wasn't in a place where there was any mirror so that she could really see that and validate that herself.
Yeah.
I have personally seen that in her and in another woman, um, and then a third woman, and then photographs. I've seen photographs of a woman in Kentucky who would sometimes change into her reptilian form, and she said it happened only when she was really in strong emotion. And so she showed me some photographs of her singing in an opera, which was one of her devoted hobbies.
Mhm.
At the height of the opera, when the emotion and, of course, the music, the song would be very heightened, that's when she would start changing into her reptilian form. So she showed me pictures with her pupils definitely changing, and all of this part of her face, most of the upper half of her face, changing texture and color into the reptilian type of skin. And
Wow.
yeah, so I said, well, how does your husband feel about this? You're changing into a reptile sometimes. And she said, well, fortunately, he's okay too. And he has some reptilian genetics in him, he had discovered.
Yeah.
Something he had wondered about and finally discovered this. And so he was really comfortable with it. In fact, he was quite interested. And she said that she and other reptilians who mostly look like humans, occasionally would look like their reptilian selves, that they had formed a church that was underground in their
Wow.
town. I think this was in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And they would go to services. She even drew a painting of the church, and it had beautiful big columns, sort of maroon colored columns holding up the ceiling
Mhm.
in church. And then around the base, around the base of each column, there was kind of like a tube that I realized, oh, that's a serpent. There was a serpent
Wow.
motif, which was very, very comfortable to those reptilians. Not to me, but to them. Each his own.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you very much. I appreciate.
Wow. Wow. This is
they're all asking really great questions. I'm appreciating it.
Paul.
Hi. Hi, Barbara.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Wonderful to be here. Yeah, wow. Beautiful conversation. So, first I'll just say, I am an experiencer, as I'm sure many others here are. I've had encounters with what appear to be a few different types of these beings, including reptilians on at least one occasion, as well as praying mantis type and the greys.
Right.
And yeah, my encounters with the greys were often really robotic kind of seeming, which I think is fairly common within the literature. And so my question is, what are your thoughts? I suppose it's a pretty general question, but what are your thoughts about the grays and concepts like people some people say that some of them are biological androids or something to that effect. We've talked about the concept of the soul. Are there I tend to look at these things from a pretty non-dual perspective, where I like to think everything has a bit of a soul, but I'm curious what your thoughts are in that regard. Yeah, just what do you think about the grays, I suppose? Thank
Well,
you.
the grays seem to show up a lot in people's regressions. They're busy little beavers, and they seem to be the ones who are particularly interested in the human body, in our physiology, how we work. And so they are often seen doing a lot of the sort of examining, poking and probing, as people say. But there are other beings who do that sometimes too, the physical exams. It just seems to people, though, that the little gray beings are more, they seem to be unfeeling. They seem to be insensitive. They seem to be more mechanical. Often people have described them. It's, I think, becoming more and more recognized that the little grays really do have AI in them. So we could call them partly robotic, and they're partly physical living beings as well. I don't know. I really don't. It's something that I wonder about their soul, whether they have a soul like the rest of the beings. I would guess that that would probably not be the case, or they wouldn't have a soul like we have. But I don't know. There's more to learn about that. But people usually are not happy being with them because they have no feeling, no sensitivity. And often the Greys are working with other types of beings. In fact, in a lot of situations, you might have even had this happen yourself, that you're on a table with the little gray beings examining your body, getting into your nostrils and other openings and taking samples of your skin and hair and fluids and whatever. And even doing the proctological exam, which people really object to very, very strongly. And so in one regression, the person in the regression was being proctologically examined and was really objecting. I mean, for one thing, it can be very uncomfortable and painful and just embarrassing to have somebody go into you that way. But the beings in that particular regression explained to the person that this exam, the proctological exam, shows more about all the systems of the person's human body than all of the other tests combined. And that's why they do it. They don't do it to be obnoxious or be mean or anything, but they get a lot of information, which then they use to either help the person, heal the person, or, as I've said earlier, to encourage the person to tell their own doctor at home to examine that particular system or that particular part of their body where
Right.
something is going amiss.
Yeah, in my case, I've gotten what seemed to be like legitimate medical advice specifically about my diet from a gray alien being. So I've really resonated with what you were saying about that earlier. So anyway, thank you for that answer. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Oh, good. And they seem to be very knowledgeable, maybe even more knowledgeable than many of our medical doctors are. I don't know. But because I say that because they seem to detect certain things that our medical people have not detected previously, and yet the conditions were actually there. But what I love the most of all about the Greys and some of the other beings too is that they do so many methods of healing. They're very generous in that way. And I just can't tell you how many people, but it is many, who've told me, and I've witnessed it, that they really were healed by these beings. And there's a huge range of physical problems.
Yeah.
So, and yet here they are looking very matter of fact, almost automatic, like automaton sort of robots, people describe them as. And yet, even when they are working with a person, there is very often another being right with them, like maybe on one side of the table. And that being is of a whole different type and certainly looks like a different type and has a different type of energy that the person feels. And if something is going on that is causing pain for the person being examined, this other one will put his or her, usually it's a her, a hand on the arm or somewhere on the person's body. And immediately that person feels no more pain and no more fear. It's like whatever this touch is, it has the effect of calming the person down. And it's quite immediate. It's extraordinary. And often when the little grays are working on the person on a medical type table, there are other beings seen around, like very often there's a mantis being who might be several feet away, but kind of overseeing what's going on. um, between the small gray beings and the person lying on the table. And in so many cases, when my client is lying on the table in a regression, that person has awareness of lots of other people on other tables in that room. So it starts out as a small focus in the regression. In other words, this person is aware of being in a very brightly lit room, and they will look ahead in the room and see a table with sort of a pedestal type support under it rather than four legs. And then next thing they know, they're up on the table and they're lying down and they're being examined, but they've had just enough, just a few moments enough to be aware before being on the table that, oh, this is really quite a large room and there are lots of tables and lots of humans. And so in the regression, I keep asking the person I'm regressing for more and more details, which I think is very, very helpful because it brings more into their awareness, which is the point, and certainly brings more into my awareness. So I'll say, well, do you see anybody else? And they'll say, oh, yeah, over to my left, there are a whole bunch of tables. And I say, well, who's on those tables? And they'll be able to at least look around with their eyes, if not with their whole head. And they'll say, oh, yeah, these are people. Some of them are children, some of them are adult, but they're human people. And they too are being examined like I am being examined. And that brings them at least a little bit of comfort in that situation, that they're not totally alone. This is, somewhat of a common thing, apparently. And so usually in the regression, we'll have them describe the beings whom they see. And so sometimes they're little gray beings. I ask lots of detail. Well, what about the shape of the head? Well, what about their eyes? What about the other features of their faces? Do they have any hair? Do they have any clothing? And then they'll describe other beings in the room, like the mantis beings, who seem to be overlooking what's going on in the table and seem to be in charge. I've had many, many people feel that they are in charge. So the mantis beings, to me, are very, very interesting. And I find myself being very fond of them. And I can't tell you exactly why, but ever since the mid 1990s, when I started regressing people to their mantis experiences, I've just developed a tremendous liking for them and have subsequently come across them in many, many people's regressions. And so they do a lot of teaching and coaching and overseeing, and they can be very good with children. They're good with rooms full of hybrid children as sort of teachers and guides from them. And they also have a playful aspect.
Yes.
Discovered in one regression, to my surprise. I had a client who had been having a lot of experiences with a mantis being coming and taking her in a long white robe, taking her out in space to being with other beings and other situations. And one night he came when she was babysitting for her 4-year-old granddaughter. And they took her and the granddaughter and took them up not into a spacecraft, but into what seemed to be a very big, round, white platform up, just floating in space. And took them onto this platform and into the middle where they'd be safe. They wouldn't be falling off. And held hand, this mantis being held hands with my client, who was a woman, And with the 4-year-old granddaughter, they formed a circle and they sort of circled around like Ring Around the Rosie with sort of a sing-songy little aspect going on. And the little girl was laughing and smiling and happy and relaxed and just loved this being, even though he was very, very tall and looked like a great big bug, but seemed to be just exuding friendliness, safety, love. And my client grew to really deeply love this mantis being. She first saw him when she herself was 4 years old, and the mantis being and a little gray and a couple of other types of beings were waiting outside her family kitchen door. And she opened the door. This was in the evening. She was the only one in the kitchen. She opened the door, and there they were. She didn't know what on earth they were. And the smaller ones, the little grays and the other ones, were saying, "You're going to be really good friends with this one," and pointed to the big mantis beings. And she said, "How can I be friends with him? He's a big bug." But it turned out that he's a wonderful being, even though he looks from our point of view like a big bug. Oh, there's another very interesting thing about them that I notice again and again with people who have experiences with the mantis beings. There seems to be a direct connection between those mantis beings in space and the praying mantis insects, those beings that we have in our gardens here on Earth. So, for instance, I visited a couple of women friends one night a few years ago and was telling them about the extraterrestrial, was particularly telling them about the mantis beings because I was so fond of them. And they had never heard any of this information before. So they were absolutely amazed and really listened and took it all in. And then the very next morning, they were sitting at their breakfast table in a corner of their kitchen, right by a corner window. And while they were having breakfast, one of them looked over and said, "Oh, look, right by you, right just outside the window, right by you, there's a praying mantis." And he was looking right in the window and looking right at one and then at the other one, like really being there to make contact. So that drew my attention to that kind of thing. And then since then, because that was a few years ago, since then, after I have done regressions with people who have had experiences with mantis beings in the regression, very often they will text me or they will call me or email me and say, "Guess what? After we have that regression, a day or so later, I went out my front door and right on the handle of the front door where I couldn't possibly miss it was a praying mantis looking right at me." And another lady said, "After my regression involving the mantis being, I went out to my driveway to get in my car, and there on the handle of the car, the driver's door, was a praying mantis being looking right up at me." And then her son reported a day or so later that when he went out to get in the car on the driveway, a mantis being just hopped up and landed right on his shoulder and just stayed there. And it happened to the father in that house as well.
Wow.
So just one example. I've heard so many examples of people discovering that they have mantis extraterrestrial visits and contacts, and then mantis beings start appearing right where they are.
Wow.
It's just an amazing thing. So I think there's a direct connection between our little insects. Well, they're pretty big insects, actually, according to our insects, but our praying mantises here in our gardens and the mantis beings out there in space. almost like they're little representatives or emissaries, reminding us that yes, they have contact with the big ones.
Wow.
And it all seem very friendly. These insects do not seem to be bothersome or injurious or anything. They're just friendly little guys. Just here I am. I want you to be aware of me. That type of thing. It's really rather sweet, I think.
Nearly all of that applies to my experience. So yeah, it's amazing. Thank you again.
Wow.
Have you seen mantis beings?
Yes, and the insects as well. In my case, leading up to an experience that I had a mantis right on my front door when I was getting home one day. And yeah, shortly thereafter, I had an experience with a praying mantis being that was extraordinarily friendly, almost like a salesman quality is how I described it. And it was it was a male sort of being, and he had two small grays with him, and it was actually maybe the only experience I've had with any extraterrestrials where I felt no fear. So
Oh, great.
yeah, very interesting.
Wow.
I think they're really exceptionally wonderful beings.
Wow.
All that I've heard from people who've had contact with them. Oh, I want to tell you about a real life experience that I had in regard to mantis. I am not aware of having had an onboard experience with a mantis extraterrestrial. But one day, this was a few years ago, I was sitting in my garden, my patio, and talking on my cell phone to a friend up in Washington State. And he was very open and eager to know about our space brothers and sisters. That's how he referred to the extraterrestrials. And so I had a good audience on my cell phone that day and was talking about the mantis beings. And I was aware that I was going on and on about the mantis beings and feeling more happy and more enraptured with everything that I said about them. And my friend was very wonderfully interested. So I kept on going. I would guess it was at least 20 minutes or so after talking about him and still talking about the mantis being on the phone. I just happened to look down at my lap and I had black slacks on. And there on my thigh was a baby light green mantis insect. Now, I had never noticed praying mantis insects in my garden before that, and I had done lots and lots of digging around and gardening personally, but had never seen a praying mantis. But after talking for 20 minutes enthusiastically about the mantis extraterrestrial, there was this baby praying mantis insect on my own thigh. And he was adorable. I immediately stopped talking to my friend and took pictures with my cell phone, thinking, oh, thank goodness I have something to take pictures with here. And after several minutes of his being there and my continuing to look down at him and talk to him and admire him, he just suddenly was gone. And I didn't see him on the floor of the patio or anywhere. But that's just one of many examples of these amazing
Wow.
beings and how we're connected, the connection, which I find very meaningful, the connection between us and them, and the connection between the insect mantis beings and the extraterrestrial mantis beings.
Yeah.
That could be true for other beings too, but I'm just not aware of them. But it certainly is true of the mantises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Well, we have time for one more question. Eva?
Hello, thank you, Craig. Hello, Barbara. Thank you for the interesting lecture.
Yes.
Here it's almost 4 a.m. and I stayed awake, and I'm glad I did. It was very worth it. So thank you very much.
Good for you. Many blessings.
As a toddler, my son told me a lot about special memories. Among other things, he told me that he had problems getting into his body, into the body he has now. He said the body didn't want to let him in. In your experience, is the soul like a parasite that chooses a body, and how many of the human bodies do you think have souls?
Oh, goodness. There's several questions right there. Could you say again what it is that your son experienced?
He was telling me that he had a hard time getting into the body. He was telling me how he was flying around and looking at me and our family and looking at the family of his friend, and that they were talking about, like, his friend came at the same time, and that, like, he had 3 friends who came to Earth at the same time, and he had a hard time to get into his body, and that the body didn't want to let him in.
Oh, my. Well, do you think that your son ever had a big change at any one point? As if the soul did get in?
I mean, he must have gotten in when I was pregnant, but he wasn't there from the beginning on. So what he was telling me, it was like first time he tried, it must have been around 3 or 4 months.
Well, you might be talking about a different kind of thing rather than a soul walk-in. There are other beings who are disincarnate, in other words, in another realm, and every once in a while it happens that one of those beings would like to live in a living human being. In other words, that type would be somebody who had died and the soul did not go into the spirit realm where we are supposed to go and hung around the earth plane, and not being in the light, not being in the spiritual realm, and not being here in physical body can get to be pretty uncomfortable for that soul, and the soul wants to inhabit a body, wants to have someone to live in. And it sounds to me like that's the type of thing that we're talking about. So you've probably heard of the word possession, where somebody is possessed by another something, another presence, another spirit of some sort. And it gets to be a real problem for the person. It's not a likable situation in those cases. And so the person will go to an exorcist or somebody who can release that spirit. And there's a whole field of therapy called spirit releasement therapy. It's not terribly well known, but I've known people who have trained people to do that. And it's a really wonderful therapy. So sometimes the incoming spirit could be a problem for the person. Like I know of an example where there was an alcoholic man who died, and instead of going into the spirit realm, which was the natural good thing to do, he hung around the earth because he wanted to be near alcohol. The soul wanted to. And so it couldn't get hold of any alcohol. So it went into the body of an 11-year-old girl, and suddenly she became alcoholic. She started craving alcohol and raiding her parents' alcohol cupboards and even buying alcohol if they would allow it in an alcohol store. And in other words, she became totally addicted. And it was because she had this addicted spirit in her. So the man I had some training with in this work years and years ago, he worked with her, and he was able to release the soul, the spirit of that alcoholic man, and send it into the light. And she suddenly, the girl, had no more interest in alcohol whatsoever. She was completely freed of that addiction. So that's a very poignant and I think dramatic example. So I'm wondering if your son might have had some spirit, that of a person who had died and didn't go into the light, wanting to get into his body. Probably seemed like that would be great to live in that boy's body, have all the adventures that he has with his friends, and, much better than just kind of floating around here, not being seen or recognized or anything. So he might not have intended any harm, or he might not have even been any harm. Sometimes these beings will inhabit a person, and at the very worst, they might drain a little bit of the person's energy, but they don't do anything harmful to the person. But they need to be released for the sake of that soul and to go up into the spiritual realm. And they also need to be released for the sake of the person, to just not have that in them. But you could have it in you. In fact, this teacher said probably most people on earth, everywhere, have some soul living in them, and yet not really causing difficulty. At the most causing maybe a little drain of energy or maybe a little depression, but not a serious problem. So that's a possibility to consider. And I think
so. You are saying everybody has a soul inside of it. In your take on it. There are no just that you're saying that everybody has a soul.
Everybody has a soul. We are a soul. Yeah. Let's start from that point of view. Okay.
How you see it. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that we think, at least I certainly grew up thinking, that we are people, and oh yes, we have a soul. But really, I think it's the other way around, that we are an ongoing, continuing, immortal soul, and here and there we decide to come into physical incarnation of some kind. And I mean, all of us right here now have decided, obviously, to come to Earth as an incarnated human. And then when we finish here, we'll go on back into that spirit realm. And at some point in the future, we will or will not, in some cases, come back into some other incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty is that some people, like the ones I've been mentioning, die and do not go into the spirit realm. And so nobody sees them, nobody knows them. It's similar to the idea of ghosts, although ghosts tend to reside in a place rather than in a person. But it's still a soul that of a person who died and did not go back into the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And is kind of lost, and that spooks out other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow.
So you can consider that as a possibility, that your son and even his friends, which I think is very interesting, had awareness apparently that somebody was trying to come into your son. Is that right?
I didn't from my perspective, it was different. Like he was telling me about former lives and how he and his friends were planning the life. And when he was trying to get into the body, he had a hard time. And then I was asking him if all his friends made it, and he said no. One of his friends, he didn't make it because the body didn't like his essence, his soul, but he tries to come in later. So that's what he was kind of telling me when he was 3 or 4 years old, in his words.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that. I don't know if we want to take more time on that now, but because there were others maybe waiting. But
I can write to Craig the whole story if you want to, and he can send it to you.
Yes, my email address is Barbara dot Lamb, Lamb,
Yes.
dot therapist at gmail.com. So that's a lot. I'll repeat that. So it's Barbara dot Lamb dot therapist at gmail.com. Yes, I would welcome that.
Okay, I'll write it together and send it to you if you want to.
Thank you. I would
You're welcome.
welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you. It was so interesting.
Good.
I certainly will share her email address with everybody. And
Okay.
over
Thank
the
you,
next couple of days, I will be putting together the this recorded version, and I will get a link out to everybody who's attended. And if you're not on the mailing list, I would highly recommend getting on the mailing list at the website, or checking with the person who gave you the reference to come in here, to make sure you get access to this amazing visit and speaker we have had this evening. Barbara, this was one of the most fascinating evenings I have ever had in my life.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Very welcome. It's wonderful to speak to people who are open and receptive, and you're obviously thinking, pondering, wondering. I think that's just great.
Yeah.
You're a wonderful group of people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so
And
much.
thank you, Craig, for having Barbara come. This was just amazing.
It's quite different, isn't it?
Oh, it's great.
Everyday discussion. Well, and the wonderful thing from my point of view is that you are open to this. You see, all of this material that I have shared, just came to me bit by bit by bit over the years. And I mean, I just feel so grateful and so blessed that life has provided this for me. I think it's good that we humans know about all of these things. Yeah, know about these other realms, these other intelligences, and certainly about the spirit realm, which a lot of these beings come from, even if they don't look like it. Yeah, so that's, I think the more we know, the better.
Yes, I think so.
Good.
That's why we're here. Thank you,
Okay.
Barbara.
Yeah, well, thank you for being who you are. It's wonderful. And I hear that you also do a lot of healing work,
Yes.
which is really wonderful. I've already given the name of one of my friends to Craig Hendricks to put on the healing list. A woman who's in her 40s, and she has endometriosis. And it's really quite miserable. She lives in Toronto, Canada. And she and I have done many, many interviews. We've got podcasts up on YouTube. So those might be interesting for some of you to watch
Yes.
occasionally. So the YouTube channel is Barbara Lamb ET Regressions. plural.
Barbara.
Yeah.
Hi.
And those addresses are on the announcements that I sent out to everybody. So all you have to do is click on them, by the way.
Thank
They're
you. Thank you,
also
Craig.
in
This
the
has
chat.
been great. I'm going to sign off for now. I'll see you soon.
See you later,
It's
Ronnie.
been wonderful. Thank you again, Barbara. And
Thank
good
you.
seeing everybody. Bye-bye
Good
for
night,
now.
Ronnie.
All right.
Bye.
Barbara, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Have you been listening to all this?
Yes, I have been listening to all of this, and I heard the not mention of my name just now. And I also wanted to say I put the YouTube link in the chat for everyone, as well as your website, so that they can see your books and all your work on your website as well.
Oh, good. So it's an okay that they know that I asked healing for you?
Yes. That's
Okay.
I don't mind. Thank you.
Good. Well,
Also,
you
it's
deserve it.
really great to see you doing this. I've missed watching you do this. It's just wonderful. So it's been great to be here, and I'm so glad that Craig invited you. It's been lovely. Yeah.
I'm so glad you knew about this. I didn't know that you did.
Yeah, I texted you earlier today and I said I was going to be there, but I think sometimes I think my texts aren't landing in your phone. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
I didn't get that. No, I didn't get that text, or I would have definitely noticed.
We'll
Anyway,
figure
how wonderful. I'm really happy that you're here. This is a wonderful group of people.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I'm very grateful to have connected with Craig and have met so many terrific people as a result. Really serious and heartfelt group is what I'm picking
Oh,
up.
good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you're part of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We have
happy.
to have we have to have our own conversation soon. I don't want to talk for too long, but just wanted to say hello and make sure you knew I was here, and also
Yeah.
post the YouTube link and the website link in the chat. Barbara has a really gorgeous website, and there's lots of wonderful material on her YouTube channel, so check it out.
Yeah. So Sinead has been wonderfully interviewing me for so many unusual subjects that are of interest to many people. Yeah, because she and I have had some amazing experiences in life, and we talk about those and certain things that many other people experience, like being aware of past lives and having spirit visitations and having various paranormal kinds of experiences and synchronicities and many, many different things that we have discussed that I or we and other people experience sometimes, all opening up to that we are so much more than we have ever thought we were.
Yes.
And that's very exciting.
Also, I just want to point out that I'm very happy to say that the vast majority of interviews that we've done are actually about Barbara's incredible life, because she's written a lot of wonderful material and done talks all over the place for years and is well known and respected in her field. But her own life experiences and her own journey, which has been quite amazing, she doesn't really talk about it. And so I thought it would be really great for people to know more about the woman behind all of this amazing research, because she's one of the original giants whose shoulders we stand on, right? If we're doing any kind of work in this field, research or just
Wow.
even personal research on an individual level. I think it's all really important stuff that we're doing right now, right? Investigating what's really going on our planet and in the galaxy around us and in the universe around us, et cetera, et cetera. But it's most of the interviews are actually about Barbara herself and her own experiences, which are extraordinary. And she doesn't talk about herself very much. So I just want to make sure that she got that opportunity to really share
what has motivated her behind all of this incredible work and research that she's done. Like, why has she done this? And so enthusiastically and so committedly for so long. I mean, it's extraordinary. So please go and check out her story. It's something else.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Sinead.